Morning, everybody. Phil Henry here from the Capricornia Chamber of Commerce, as always, with the President of the Chamber, Jason Foss. Morning, Jason.
Morning, Phil. Morning, everyone. Or afternoon or evening, depending on when you watch this. Just to throw a spanner into the works.
And to complicate it even further, we're doing this before the thing that we're talking about.
Yes, we are.
No, that's right. That's what you said. So this is all about the forthcoming federal election. It's still a couple of weeks away as we make this, but it's about the interviews with the candidates we're doing, isn't it, Jason?
That's right. So yeah, as per our tradition, it's become a bit of a tradition, I suppose. We've sent invitations out to all of the candidates for the seat of Capricornia, and we will have a chat with them all individually, asking them some business and industry-specific questions, which Phil will get to in a minute. And the deal is that each of them get the questions 24 hours before we have the chat, so nobody has any advantage or disadvantage there. Everybody's on a level playing field. Doing it slightly different this time. Previously, we've sort of picked a morning and kind of had people coming and going over the course of the morning, but scheduling's been a bit difficult this time. So we're doing them online. I'm using a service called riverside.fm, which is kind of like Zoom, but with better audio and video quality. It's designed for, podcasts and that sort of thing.
Cool.
First time I've used it. What could possibly go wrong?
Who knows? This will be tested.
It will be tested. So this is a bit of an experiment for us using this format too. Phil, you got the questions.
No, these are the questions. So there's no lead in as you see the interviews with the candidates. These are the questions that we've asked all of them. The first one was, so what are your top 3 infrastructure priorities for Capricornia? And they've got 3 minutes to answer that. Then what do you see as the main impediments to small and medium business growth and viability? And what would you do to address those impediments to that sort of growth? And they've got 3 minutes to answer that. And then they've got 2 minutes to just wrap up what their claims are for election.
Do their final elevator pitch.
That's right.
A 2-minute elevator pitch.
Without an elevator.
Without an elevator, yes. All right, so I guess without further ado, let's get into the answers.
Indeed.
Okay, the 3 infrastructure projects that I think are important for Central Queensland would be roads, Great Keppel Island and housing. Great Keppel Island, before we can really go any further with that, needs to have the native title claim that is on it settled. We can't get investors to spend a lot of money there, or any money basically, because they don't know what's going to happen with native title. And we also don't need, as taxpayers, to spend tens of millions of dollars on something that we're not sure that we as taxpayers will actually be able to use. We need to probably push the federal government to fast track the native title claim that currently sits there, and see where that ends up, I guess. There is precedent sitting there. We had 13 to 14% native title was what was granted in the first claim. At this point in time, from my understanding, it can be read that the Indigenous people can have 100% use of the island, which would mean that we obviously can't use it at all. That is probably my thing with Great Keppel Island. We need to sort that out first. As for roads, I know that the Bruce Highway has been promised money, but we have a lot of roads that feed in and out of Central Queensland, are the agriculture and the mining areas that really do need addressing. There is roads out there that are really incredibly unsafe. I think what we need to do is put pressure back on the federal government to give the state government some money out of all the billions that they pull out of that area, to actually give money back to the state so that we can actually repair those roads. But we need to make sure that when we do that, that money doesn't go into a fund that, just disappears into the southwest or southeast corner. We need to make sure that money is actually locked to Central Queensland. Then as for the homes that we need homes for many areas. We need homes for the elderly to transition out of their homes and into some sort of a semi-independent living rather than being put straight into hospitals. We need homes for the homeless. They're looking for, somewhere that they can go so that they can get safe sleeping, they can have somewhere to wash their clothes, somewhere to shower, and somewhere that they can lock their possessions so that they can actually go back out into society and be able to try and apply for jobs and so forth. We also need housing then for people that are in these local areas that are low income earners, and they're really struggling at this point in time, and we need to find something for them too. What do I see as the main impediments to growth in business? I see basically over-regulation. I see over-regulation for small business and medium-sized business that leads to overcomplication, and overcomplication quite often leads to mistakes. They're not mistakes that people particularly want to make, but they're mistakes that are made simply because it is too hard to work your way through all the different acts and so forth that you will get sent to you when you ring a government department for help. I've spent countless hours over the years speaking to government departments. Years ago, they used to be able to actually give us an answer on the phone. Nowadays, you never get that. You're basically told to go back to an accountant or a solicitor if you can't sort your way through it yourself. The other things that I find is the red, the green and the black tape that it's out there, particularly for businesses. Even if they jump through all those hoops and cross all the I's, dot all the T's, whatever, they are still not guaranteed at the end to actually be able to get a start on the project. That is really bad for investment in our country, and it costs businesses lots and lots of money. The other thing we need to do is we need to get the cost of power, fuel and insurance down. That is really, really costing business a fortune at this point in time. I'd like to think that I would bring to the table experience through business, through being that bit older, that I've actually seen things that go through that become cyclic. You can sort of recognise them before perhaps somebody who is younger. You've had that experience of, raising a family, of having to struggle through, of having to, set up a business, of having elderly parents. You've seen a lot of stuff and you've had to deal with that. And I think that gives you just that little bit more insight in some cases into what other people are dealing with. I also think that we need to really be careful with the money that we're spending in this country. We need to sort of put a fairly tight rein on that. We need to stop leaving or making huge amounts of debts for future generations to try and pay off. At this point in time, if we keep going the way we are, we would be lucky to leave them with a financial and cultural hole that they could actually find their way back out of. It's going to be really, really tough on them, and I actually think that future Australians deserve far better than that.
My top 3 infrastructure priorities for Capricornia are housing, transport and access, and power, electricity. So I'll start with electricity. Obviously, there's a lot of politicisation of this issue, but we want to make sure that we have affordable, cheap electricity, both for domestic users and also for small businesses and mid-level enterprises. The most affordable power by far is renewable energy with storage. We've got to get that mix right and do it right. But we've got a lot of, talk about nuclear power, maintaining coal and gas energy, and that's extremely expensive. And that's extremely expensive for end users as well. So we want to make sure that our public electrical utilities are run for the benefit of end users, and that includes, people setting up more of an industrial and manufacturing concern, but also just keeping the lights on in any kind of business or any kind of home. Second one is transport and access to workplaces. So we've been talking a bit to people on East Street, even struggling with parking. When we've got the 50-cent bus fares pushed through the major parties at the state election, that's very beneficial for everyone looking for a job or everyone looking to roster or staff a position, and making sure that we have accessible workplaces, particularly on those areas where we want small businesses developing. That's really important. It takes a lot of work. The third one is housing. If you look at somewhere like the Sunshine Coast, people working in small businesses on the Sunshine Coast, and we're talking employees, entry-level employees, struggle to find a home to live in anywhere near their workplace. This is one of the shapes of that housing crisis, right? So we want to make sure that we're treating housing like a fundamental human right, but also an adjunct to business and economic activity. If we have a bunch of people migrating out of the city centre or not being able to find homes nearby, that's going to make it harder to roster and employ people in various businesses. Some people can work from home, a lot of people can't, particularly in service roles and things like that. So that's really important as well. And I think that's fundamentally, and we can talk a bit more about this as we go on, that need to make sure that our essential public services are run for the benefit of end users and the community is also going to benefit small business, because they're end users. They're not necessarily generating their own power and profiting from it, but they absolutely need those utilities and services in place so that they can staff their shops, have people coming in off the street, and that's about infrastructure as much as spending. Thanks. So there's a few impediments to the growth of small and medium enterprises. And one of them is very large companies getting a privileged access through government contracts, often no compete tenders. We talk a lot about the way, a lot of the tender processes go through Brisbane. There's lack of accountability there. But I mean, more broadly, what we're dealing with is a model where large multinational corporations, including logistics corporations or companies that are centred in Brisbane, get contracts or can loss lead and compete with local industry and enterprise, which stops those local industries from stepping up. That growth isn't particularly functional at the moment, So we've got to make sure that we're actually not allowing privileged access by anyone to our political class and legislators and people handing out the tenders, bureaucrats and the like. That's a challenge, but that's bread and butter for the Greens, making sure that we end that privileged access. We don't take corporate donations, so that's one of our key businesses. But also we're talking about, as we've talked about, profit-taking in essential services and utilities. When we talk about things like power, but even something like childcare, I'll use as an example, right? We've talked a bit about housing. But if you're dealing with, again, rostering or trying to get people on, or even small businesses with families taking care of their own kids, the fact that childcare is run on a profit model, the fact that power is run on a profit model, the fact that housing is run on a profit model makes it harder to actually have a viable business. Finding the people to come along and work in your store or another concern is really challenging when they face it, when you're basically competing with a childcare system it's very expensive. At certain stages in the last few years, childcare was more expensive than private school, So small business owners shouldn't have to compete with other enterprises which are providing childcare. We should have a public option that is more viable and more affordable for people. There are some grants, but we have to make sure that we actually fix these big problems like housing and childcare, so that you're not battling against that when you're trying to just get a roster done for a week, or hiring somebody to step up, or, I'd love this person to be the manager of my store, of my first or second store, but I can't. It's not going to work for them. They can only squeeze a few hours out. These are big issues in small business, and I think in mid-level enterprises as well. They've got a bit more room to move, but they're still struggling to build careers into their businesses that benefits everybody. I mean, small business and mid-level enterprises employ the most people, but they don't get the most priority. Politicians talk about them a lot, but the policies aren't really what those small enterprises need. We need to take care of those fundamental issues a lot better. So the Greens don't take corporate donations like the other political parties, and as a result, we're not part of that system of patronage that puts a lot of pressure on our community and puts a lot of pressure on small business and mid-level enterprises as well. Our policies are based on evidence and not politics. So when we talk about things like what's the most affordable power, how do we solve the housing crisis, how do we get more people into work, those are things based on speaking to small business owners, mid-level enterprises, experts in the field, and everyday people who are struggling with those issues. We can't keep going down this economic model where housing is squeezing people extraordinarily, where there's profit-taking in essential services which get in the way of genuine economic activity. We absolutely have to make some substantial changes. Ideologically, I guess some people believe in free markets. I believe there's no such thing as a free market, right? We have to make sure that our democracy is well regulated so that we can have economic activity that benefits the community, so that we can have those good jobs in small business, which continues to be the number one employer, continues to be the main source of employment in our economy. We want to make sure workers are taken care of, but we want to make sure that we're not squeezing that economic activity. And that's the big challenge, because big parties get a lot of big donations from those big companies. But we're up for that challenge, and we've pushed a fair few concessions through government recently. We're seeing the big parties adopt our policies and rebrand them and run with them, and that's all good. That's great. And we want to make sure that we're taking action on these big issues for the good of our community and for the good of a part of the economy that actually serves our community, provides employment and provides essential services, and provides the things that we need to make a good life as well. Thanks very much for your time today.
Look, obviously roads is a massive thing, and the coalition has committed $7.2 billion to the Bruce Highway. I've had some meetings in recent time with the Department of Main Roads about getting more passing lanes between Rockhampton and Mackay. And that is a bit of a battle because they say, oh, you've got these big long stretches and all the rest of it, but it's definitely a priority, as well as things like the Peak Downs Highway. Very, very important that we get those up and going. The next thing is Rockhampton Airport. Now, Rockhampton Airport is something, like, we don't have a port in Rockhampton, so the airport's our port. We've put over $44 million already into the airport with Alliance, with the infrastructure, like the security and all the rest of it that's there. But we've just committed another $20 million. And so what that would be for is $15 million for Bay 7. And so Bay 7's between Alliance Airlines and the main terminal, and that will increase the capacity on the tarmac for international flights, for the military exercises, but also $5 million towards a shed where our international military can actually wait before they board those international planes. What I would eventually like to see is Rockhampton be an international airport, and and to have a cold and dry storage area there, which I think would be extremely important for the future of the area. And when you see things like Rookwood Weir, that has gone ahead, we can do that with the agriculture. But we've got two big meatworks in Rockhampton. Imagine exporting beef directly from Rockhampton over to Singapore, Japan, all those sort of places. So the airport's a bit of a passion of mine, as you might tell, but I think it's really, really important. And something else that we've been very focused on is sporting facilities. So we've made a number of announcements to small sporting organisations, from $200,000 up to a couple of $1 million. And I think that's really important because it's very hard for those organisations to do fundraising, but it's a way to keep kids off the streets, get them behaving, but teaching them about, working with each other and all the rest of it. So they've been, these groups have been very, very happy about this. And to get $200,000 from the government is a big lifesaver for them. So been very happy about doing that, and particularly with the Olympics, in 2032, and the rowing coming to Rocky and all the rest of it. I think it's important that we encourage kids to be involved in sport as much as we can. Well, I think the biggest thing probably is red and green tape, and there's just too much bureaucracy for small businesses. So we've got to help them as much as we can. And, things like the putting $30,000 for the instant asset write-off, that is really important. Labor had chopped that out of the budget. We got them to put it back in. They've said $20,000, we've said $30,000. And I think that is really, really important. We've got to do more training for staff. And I think, with apprentices and things like that. So we are putting policies forward to actually help with that, but help the businesses with it rather than the individuals. And I think that's really important to do that because, small and medium business is the backbone of our nation, and we really need to be there to help them as much as we can. The cost of electricity is massive right across the sector. And so we, and we've discussed about nuclear, which is a long-term plan. But what we need to do is to get more gas into the system so that we can start getting the cost of electricity down. The cost of these renewable energy projects is out of control, and it's probably one of the biggest complaints that we have in this office is how much that is costing, but what it's doing to our environment and our communities. It's just not good enough. One of the really good things that we've put forward, that Peter Dutton has put forward, is the fuel excise, cutting that in half. So if we're elected, as soon as we get back into Parliament, 25 cents a litre off your fuel. And that has gone down extremely well, particularly with small businesses, because people are saying, Michelle, it's just not the cost of the fuel, it's, freight and all the follow-on effects that will actually have. So I think that is really important. And another thing too is skilled migration. So, we are going to cut back immigration, and that has caused, we feel that it's caused a lot of problems with housing and all the rest of it. But what we want to see is skilled people coming in to help our businesses, because there seems to have been this lack of employees since COVID, and I just don't know where they've gone. So we've got to get people in to help with that. But I think that if we can get, look at where the work shortages are, get skilled immigration into this country and fast track it is really important. I think that would be extremely good. And during this last term of government, I've been the Assistant Shadow Minister for manufacturing. And so I've visited a lot of manufacturing places right across the country. And, there's a whole series of issues there, which probably similar to what I've talked about, with energy costs, with staffing costs. Materials is another thing about getting that into this country. So I would really like to see our manufacturing sector boom, and we will be releasing policies to actually help with that also. Since I've been elected for the last 11 and a half years, I've put over $7 billion of infrastructure into Capricornia. Things like Rookwood Weir, which has been enormous for, future agriculture in this area. And as I said earlier, with exporting all the rest of it. One of my biggest pleasures was Rockhampton Hospital car park, and it took a mighty effort to get that up and going, I can tell you. But, we've put hundreds of millions of dollars into road infrastructure on both sides of Rocky, up in the north, when you look at the Peak Downs Highway, the Eaton Range, all of these projects, the Rockhampton Ring Road. Now, there's a lot of false things said from the Labor Party about the Rocky Ring Road, but we've got the infrastructure on both sides of the highway of Rocky. We've put the initial money on there. Yes, the costs have blown out of that because it has taken so long to get it going. But unless the community of Rockhampton and Central Queensland went into bat, this wouldn't have been happening. So it's things like that. The Rockhampton-Yeppoon Road, it just goes on. And, the airport, as I said, that is very, very important. Health is another important issue. We are releasing policies about getting more doctors here. And when you look at like Central Queensland University with the doctors program, I think that things like that are very, very important. So we will continue to do that. We are very focused on the regions. Since federal Labor's been in government, all the regional programs have stopped. We will be reintroducing those. We have just reintroduced a new plan yesterday to put $20 billion into regional Australia, and that will pay for things like roads, pay for things like our health, pay for infrastructure for the area. So I think it's extremely important that we focus on regional Australia, not just the cities.
So the top three infrastructure priorities that I have for Capricornia, the first one, the big one, is the Bruce Highway. Obviously, the Bruce Highway is the major artery of Queensland in terms of transport of a variety of materials. And for too long, we've seen the highway go down and down in terms of its safety and its rate of repair. So the Labor government obviously made their huge announcement of a $7.2 billion investment in the Bruce Highway. We're already getting to work on that. We've had $300 million worth of early works get started. Some of those works included the stretch between Rocky and St. Lawrence, which we know is a really critical area for people in terms of safety. So that's priority number one. Priority number two is looking more locally at our local roads and community infrastructure. So there are federal government programs like the Roads to Recovery program and the Community Accessibility Fund, which are federally funded and can be applied for by a local council to do things like fix the local roads. We've seen some of that money get used for the repairs over on the corner of Denison Street, But we want to go a step further. So if elected, I will work both with the Rocky Regional Council, with Livingston Shire Council, and with other councils within Capricornia to see the delivery of those funds here locally in our regions. And finally, my priority is to see investment in community infrastructure, which then drives tourism to our area. So recently I met with the mountain biking club over near Mount Archer to look at their plans for the future with the sport. Now, what we know and what they've shown me is the sport is driving huge amounts of tourism across the country. And if we invest in the mountain biking tracks, both here and then I know they're also wanting to do ones over in Finch Hatton in Yungala, that will drive huge amounts of tourism to our region. So that benefits everyone in our region by showcasing our beautiful natural landscape, but also by supporting our businesses through accommodation, tourism, our food and beverage businesses, all of that. Yeah, so when it comes to small and medium enterprises and their viability in the region, we know that the last few years have been really tough for everyone, but particularly for our small businesses. That's why the government has released real cost of living relief with the electricity fund, and also by providing tax cuts to every taxpayer. Now, what happens when you provide tax cuts to every taxpayer is people have a bit more money in their pocket to spend at getting a coffee at the local cafe or going out for dinner with their family and their friends, which helps drive business in our economy here locally. But we're also going a step further than just that, with our investments in things like fee-free TAFE, so really driving that skilled workforce here in Central Queensland, and also by extending the $20,000 instant asset write-off by 12 months. So all of these pieces come together to help support our small businesses. We've actually seen small business grow under a Labor government. It's had one of the biggest growths in small business of any government, which has been really positive. But we do know that a lot of people have been struggling and doing it tough. So these are the things that we're doing to address it. What we also want to see is people living locally and training locally and working locally. So with investments in the university and also other areas, we're seeing that growth of people being able to study and work and live locally, which then drives growth and benefit for our small businesses as well. Capricornia deserves a fresh start. For a long time, we have seen very little growth in our region. And what I want to do, if elected, is to really stimulate and look forward to our future. Capricornia has a lot of really strong potential in terms of its tourism, its agriculture, its mining, its industry, its business, its services, everything really. There's a lot of potential here in our region. And I want to be someone who is not only excited for the growth in our region, but is also driving it forward. I think it's really important for politicians to work very closely with small business and community groups to be able to drive that growth, and to be well informed about the unique challenges in our area. So if elected, I will also work hand in glove with our small businesses and community groups to really understand what their peculiar challenges are and make sure that the government is addressing it in a very neat and efficient fashion. As a lawyer, I do have some understanding of, business needs and how to grow a practice and all those sorts of things as well. So I'd be able to bring those skills into the role as well. But essentially, all I want to do is see our region grow and prosper and thrive under a strong leadership, which is really driving that investment in our region, both now and into the future.
All right, so there we have it. Now, we're actually shooting this before we've done any of these interviews, so as at us recording this now, I have no idea what anybody said. But the Chamber, of course, is apolitical.
Yes,
we're not
indeed.
in any
No.
particular person's camp, but we just presented all of the answers there as is. Hope you found it useful to help you make an educated and informed decision.
Indeed.
And that's it for another election. When's the next one? It'll be a council election sometime, won't it?
Oh, yeah, one of them. Yep.
We've got a couple of years, I think.
Yeah. No, well, you'll have a break from these for a little while.
Thankfully, everybody
Indeed.
says. Alrighty, thanks
All
for
right,
watching,
all
guys.
good. Thank you.
See you next time.
Bye.